We have assault rifles, light machine guns, DMRs, shotguns, a large selection of different weapon types. One of the categories that stands at the top of the arena is SMGs. The small, close quarters nature of arena matches make these fast-firing pea shooters a nightmare to deal with. No matter what helmet or face protection you wear, please bless us with Alton face shields BSG, there will be nothing that could stop high-end SMG rounds. So instead of testing with just high penetration bullets, I decided to evaluate how each weapon performs by both leg meta and armor penetration. But the footage you'll be seeing is leg meta. The Scout class is limited to level 4 and below body armor, and level 3 and below helmets. The numbers that you see repeated a lot, like 2 and 3, usually mean the level of under armor that you have. You want to make sure you have at least level 3 under armor, since all under armor is made of aramid right now. It doesn't matter which armored vest or armored tactical rig that you use, so long as it has level 3 before you add plates in, then it's good. One conundrum of body armor is that the thorax is generally the area around your ribcage, right? However, BSG has an armoring system where if you look at something like the Trooper, you have the front plate and the back plate. You might think this means that this is the level of the plate that you put in, but you would be wrong. If you look at the Slick, for example, you can insert plates and it says the level of the plates as it normally would, but when you take them out, it now says that there's level 3 soft under armor under those plates. If you go back to the Trooper and take out those plates, they do not have level 3 soft under armor. And to make it even more confusing, there is another armored area called the thorax that is usually covered by a different title. So how do you make sense of it all? I'm going to show you this concept through the Profi Plate Carrier V2 Black. If you want to know 100% for sure that your armor does what it says, strip it of all of its plates. What you're left with is what the armor protects. For soft armor protection, when it says front plate, back plate, this is the same as just having thorax protection. This makes sense because you never see them together. You only have the front plate, back plate, or thorax. Remember, I'm talking about the soft under armor, not the plates themselves. I'll do more testing on my part to try and see if this is really true, but going off of the current evidence, it's safe to assume that this is the case. You also don't need to worry too much about neck coverage and adding side plates. These additions usually cost a lot more, and since you hardly ever get hit there, you can spend those rating points on more important stuff like better front and back plates and ammo. However, if you do have the extra points to spare, these components are still beneficial to your overall survival, so use them if you can. For your helmet, just go with the Tor-2 if you can afford it. But you could also downgrade to the HJ-ELM and the Cayman in that order specifically. This is because the Tor-2 and the helm are both made of combined materials, which is the third best of 7 in terms of destructibility. It also has higher total hit points than the helm. All 3 have a high ricochet chance, so it is possible that you could deflect a bullet rated for level 6 armor like the 62 penetration M61 bullet. However, it's very unlikely. We don't want to use the LSHZ because it only has a medium ricochet chance. If you think of it in a more simplified way, each ricochet level is 1/3. If you have high ricochet, then you get a 3 out of 3 chance to ricochet a bullet. It doesn't actually give you a 100% ricochet chance, but conceptually, this is pretty close. And for your headphones, make sure to test each one of them to find one that sounds best to you. There are higher end headsets that give you a larger hearing advantage, but that should be secondary to having a good time hearing things. Just start from the Comtac 6s and work your way down until you find one that suits you best. And as for healing, stimulants are always best. Standard AHF1 to stop and prevent bleeding, and the ETGC to help heal up your remaining limbs. I won't spend too much time on bullets, as this isn't a bullet-focused video, but we will touch on the important parts of everything. Generally speaking, for all SMGs, you want the highest penetration round possible. You must aim for the face because the highest penetration bullet only goes up to 39, so it won't really be able to quickly penetrate level 5 and above armor. Even if they are wearing a face cover, the highest level of face cover right now is level 4, so high penetration rounds like the PvP for 9x19 that are close to the 40 penetration mark shouldn't have problems getting through. And the only viable leg meta round for SMGs is 45 RIP, and only when it's coming out of something like the Vector. Generally speaking, whether you take out one leg or both legs, the amount of bullets needed to kill is the same. You can see this kind of math in my Shotgun Madness video when I calculated the damage for RIP slugs. So at 130 damage per shot, you only need 5 bullets, accounting for the 0.7 damage reduction to blacked limbs. At 1100 RPM, this is usually pretty easy to do. But the runner-up, 9x19 RIP at 102 damage, needs at least 6 bullets to kill. This is somewhat doable with fast-firing weapons like the UZI Pro or the Vector, but the MP5 and MPX will still struggle to accomplish that. This is also under the assumption that you can hit all of your shots. The reality is that some shots might hit the opponent's armor before you hit the legs, or you will hit the gap between the legs, which all takes valuable time that you don't have in Arena. Aiming for face shots is also harder than it sounds because you are aiming for such a small area, and a lot of times the bullets hit the helmet or the armor. The confrontational style of Arena also means that you rarely ever get the drop on an opponent, so the fight is decided in the first engagement, which usually ends in someone getting headshotted. The good news is that your other loadout components usually are pretty cheap anyways, so there are rarely any cases where you can't afford a few mags of high penetration bullets. So always go for high penetration, never go for flesh damage. The first SMG that we're going to go over is the MPX. This is a pretty respectable SMG with 850 RPM, and this thing could fire fast enough to secure a headshot kill. The starting MPX is already decent enough, but it features a lot of modability. You can go full ergo or full recoil, or go for a balanced build. Since the recoil is already pretty good anyways, I just went with the ergonomics route so I could aim faster than my opponent can. Plus a lot of the other parts already give better recoil reduction anyways, so there's a bonus with that as well. As mentioned before, 850 RPM is fast, but not fast enough to be effective with RIP rounds. The MPX is a very flexible weapon, so no matter how you build it, so long as you use high penetration bullets, it will be able to carry you pretty well. Next up is the P90. This weapon is the only SMG to natively have a 50 round magazine, so if you're a fan of starting off strong, then the P90 is a good weapon to use. It also has one of the faster fire rates of 900 RPM, so it will very rarely get outpaced. There's not that much modding that you could do, but in this situation, that is also fine. The starting stats are all really good already, and the changes that you can make will make the P90 a little better. 73 ergonomics is already very competitive in a game where 50 and 40 ergonomics is the normal. And with 202 horizontal recoil, combined with the hidden recoil stats of SMGs, this level of recoil is still easily controllable even with low level recoil reduction skills. For reference, my SMG skill only reduces my recoil by 1.8%. The P90 combined with SS190 makes for an insanely powerful headhunter, but on the other hand, leg meta is still not viable. Even with the extra 50 RPM over something like the MPX, the best flesh meta for 5.7, the R37.F, only does 98 damage, so it won't be able to kill in any reasonable amount of time. So if you're running with the P90 as a high penetration headhunting SMG, then the P90 is really great and a viable weapon. But if it's being used as a leg meta weapon, it's not good at all. Third on our list is the Vector 45. This thing is one of the best SMGs in the game right now, but only when used in the right environment. The ergonomics are higher than normal at a base 74, but the MOA, or you could call it the accuracy, is one of the highest at 6.88. You can put on a longer barrel to improve it a little bit, but it's still well over 6 MOA. This combined with pretty high recoil for an SMG, ranging from low to mid 200s depending on how you mod it, and the fast fire rate makes it pretty hard to land shots at medium and long ranges. So really, you should only try to put yourself in situations where you could get close enough to the enemy. So as long as you can get close enough, the 1100 RPM will do the rest. Whether it's leg meta or AP rounds, the 45 Vector can eliminate opponents in milliseconds. This is a good weapon in my books. Our number 4 is the MP5. The ergonomics and horizontal recoil of the MP5 is pretty good at 68 and 209 respectively. These stats can be adjusted with a little bit of modding, but the accuracy of the weapon is very high at 6.55 MOA, and there's nothing you could do to improve this. So you should really stick to those close distance fighting, because otherwise your bullets will have trouble finding their mark. Another interesting feature is that the MP5 has a burst fire mode. This is actually not that bad with the way that recoil is for now. It's a good in-between for semi-automatic and automatic. It lets you put down a lot of bullets, but also lets you do it more accurately than full automatic, and at a pace faster than semi-automatic. In the main game, you might find some more use for it, but with how close in a confined area arena is, you should really just stick with the automatic. At 800 RPM, it still outpaces a large majority of the guns, so as always, just aim for the face, and usually the opponent will just walk into the stream of bullets. Just make sure that you're not trying to leg meta, otherwise the MP5 is also a good pick. For number 5, we have the Vector 9x19, the little brother of the 45 Vector. In terms of stats and modding, the 9mm is nearly identical to the 45 counterpart. It does have an easier time with recoil because it is firing a smaller caliber compared to the 45, but otherwise everything is generally the same. The accuracy is a little bad at 6.22 MOA, but can go to 5.89 MOA with a longer barrel. I went with a heavy leaning ergonomic build so I could aim faster, because I was going to be using it in small maps like Chop Shop or Equator. You do have the option of running a drum mag, but I would advise against it. It takes away 19 ergonomics, and if you don't have the aim drill skills leveled up high enough to give you extra aiming speed, you will really start to feel the effects of the extra weight and lower ergonomics. The big stick magazines are usually enough to hold you over for 1 and sometimes even 2 kills if you ration your ammo well enough, but you should try to reload to a clean mag after every kill. Also, at 950 RPM, you can count on your hand the number of weapons that can outshoot the Vector 9mm. At 950 RPM, you can make the 9x19 grip work, but it's still not that great, especially if you're up against opponents who could kill you in the first peek. I still recommend using PvPs to save your sanity, but if you want to try something new by using rip rounds, it's still doable. If you use it in close areas or areas with potential to close the distance to your opponent, then the Vector 9mm is also a very good choice. For number 6, we have the MP9-N. This is the version with the 1100 RPM. For reference, this is at the same level as the 45 Vector. Starting stats are all very good at 88 ergonomics and 221 horizontal recoil, but its MOA is the highest we've seen at 7.22 MOA. There's not a lot of modding that you could do with the MP9 family of weapons, so unfortunately, this cannot be fixed. Since it is firing 9x19, a relatively small caliber, it has a pretty good time controlling recoil. One thing I think that is important to mention is that even when fully modded, the MP9-N is incredibly light, barely over 2.5 kilograms. Something like the Vector, for example, can easily be up to 3 to 4 kilograms, so when you're moving around or aiming with the MP9-N, your mouse sensitivity might seem higher than usual, but that's normal given how light your kit and your gun is. Just like with the Vector 45, the name of the game is to get close enough to your opponent to where accuracy does not matter. Even with the fast fire rate, 9x19 RIP is still not that great of a leg meta round. But if any weapon can make it easier, it's definitely the MP9-N. My opinion on it is it's the same as with the Vector 9. It's doable, but still isn't fast enough to be competitive against more skilled players. Overall, the MP9-N can still be carried by its incredible fire rate, which makes it a high-performing weapon in the right environment. I also want to take the time to quickly talk about the MP9, the 900 RPM version. It has the same stats as the 1100 RPM version, except the 900 version lets you use a foregrip of your choosing. If you're going for headshots, then maybe you might want to go for the MP9, because the extra ergonomic potential with that foregrip is well worth it. But if you're trying to go for leg meta, the benefits of the extra ergonomics is not nearly worth the loss in fire rate. For something a little more exotic, and our number 7, it's the SR-2M. This is nearly identical to the MP9. It has high starting ergonomics, at least 85, but also really low recoil at 190 horizontal. It also has a really bad MOA at 7.83, so precision shots are going to be a little difficult to achieve with this weapon. Similarly, you also can't mod it very much, so for the most part, your stats are going to hover or stay at these numbers. The saving grace for the SR-2M is the 900 RPM, which lands it among the top in terms of fire rates in Tarkov's current meta. 7N42 also has the same penetration of 38 as the 45 AP, but it has a much lower flesh damage of 49 compared to 66. But that's alright because the recoil is much lower, so more of your shots can land on target. Leg meta should definitely be avoided because the best round, 9x21 PE, only has 80 flesh damage, which makes the SR-2M a far from effective leg meta weapon. So make sure you're using 7N42 to turn it into a fast-firing headshot machine. The KLIN is overall better than the KEDR B, so it will be used as a landmark when comparing the two of them in this section. The KLIN has a faster fire rate of 1000 RPM compared to the 900 the KEDR B has. Regardless of the difference, these put them both in the upper ranks in terms of fire rate. The recoil on both are also very low, with 177 on the KEDR B and 211 on the KLIN. But both KEDRs have two big problems which make them difficult to use. The first one is that there's little to no modding that could be done. KEDR B cannot have a tactical device, so hip fire is inaccurate, and it also cannot have a sight, which makes it the worst of the two. The second problem is that ammunition choices for 9x18 are really bad. The highest penetration you can have is 28, which is barely good enough to penetrate a level 3 armor, which is hardly ever used in arena aside from level 3 helmets. This means that even if you try to go the high penetration route, you'll still struggle to secure even headshot kills. And if you want to go for leg meta, the best damage is SP7 at 77 flesh damage. Even with 1000 RPM, this is not fast enough to secure a kill. If I did the math right, then you will need at least 8 shots accounting for damage reduction. That is an insane amount of hits that you need to make in order to kill somebody. If you really want to use the KEDR family of weapons, I would really recommend you going for the KLIN and use PSTM, because even though it has 4 less penetration than PBM, if damage reduction gets applied to PBM when it penetrates armor, it can take it to below 35 damage, which is not enough to one-shot a head. Overall, these two weapons are a very bad choice for any scenario. The MP7A1 and A2 are nearly the exact same weapon. The reason why the A2 is superior to the A1 is the built-in Picatinny rail that lets you put on a foregrip of your choice. The MP7A2 has 69 ergonomics and 150 horizontal recoil. Since your recoil is so low, it's a better idea to invest in better ergonomics to give you the speed advantage when aiming. It also has a 950 RPM, which makes it part of the fastest firing weapons in Tarkov. A problem that seems to get progressively worse as this list goes on is that the MP7 has a really bad MOA. At 8.34, it's a good thing that this weapon has a full auto mode. Otherwise, precision shots would be a little annoying to do. There's no real option that's for leg meta, so sticking with the best penetration is really the only route that you can take in this situation. Just for the fun of it, the math comes out to 12 bullets for leg meta using Subsonic SX. If you stick with FMJ SX, the MP7 is a beast of a weapon. Multiple 40 penetration rounds coming at 950 RPM to the head can put down any enemy, even players using the Vulcan. Moving on to our newer SMGs, the UZI Pros. There are two flavors of UZI Pro, the Pistol and the SMG. The only difference is that the pistol version lets you put on a foregrip, but the tactical device requires a Hydra sight mount. If you hate guns with height over bore issues, or just guns that look fugly, this is the worst of the two. The SMG version won't let you put on a foregrip, but it lets you put a laser on the side, making the Uzi look a lot cleaner, and the laser easier to follow. The starting stats are pretty good at around 80 ergonomics and around 200 horizontal recoil. You can swap out for longer barrels to make them more accurate, and stocks to give you higher ergo and lower recoil. They both also share a fire rate of 1075 RPM, landing them in the top 5 of the fastest firing weapons in Tarkov as of Arena 0.2.4. It's undoubtedly incredibly efficient as a headhunter using PvP rounds, but as for RIP rounds, it's still not that great. I was able to find some success managing to get a positive KD using both versions, but in both cases, I had to play more reserved and let enemies come to me. I wouldn't recommend leg meta, but I would highly recommend the high penetration PvP bullets. The MP5K is generally seen as inferior to the MP5. It does have a high ergonomic stat of 81 and a higher fire rate than the MP5 Navy at 900 RPM. However, it has a higher recoil of 259, and the only modding that you could do is putting on an optic. It is also a very inaccurate weapon with a 7.56 MOA. All of this combined makes it a pretty hard weapon to use. Even at close distance, the bullets tend to land everywhere, so you will want to get as close to the opponent as possible. Leg meta is even less viable because fire rate is still pretty low at 900 RPM, and the accuracy and recoil make getting those hits even more luck-based. So for the MP5K, you should really just stick with penetration bullets. One last thing to mention is that you have a unique running animation where your PMC lifts up the MP5K, but this covers a lot of your screen, blocking your view. The UMP used to be considered one of the greatest weapons in Tarkov, and in my opinion, it still is. The ergonomics are nothing special, starting at 55, but the best thing about the UMP is its recoil. It has a base recoil of 170, but that can be brought down a little more through modding. But combined with the slow fire rate of 600 RPM and its hidden stats, the UMP is a pretty good SMG. It's also decently accurate for an SMG at 5.78, so as long as you don't stretch it out too far, it shoots quite accurately. This is only a good weapon when you're using it with APs. The 38 penetration and 66 flesh combination make it at worst a painful hit, and at best an instant kill. Leg meta shouldn't even be a consideration because 600 RPM is painfully slow, so there's effectively zero situations where you would be given enough time to slowly take out your opponent's legs. I was able to get a decent amount of kills, but the outcome was still a negative KD ratio. So leg meta is possible, but if you're playing to win, penetration is still the way to go. The Uzi, the normal version, is also very similar to the UMP. It starts with 73 ergonomics. Aiming quickly is not a problem. The recoil is also sufficiently low and with some modding you can take it down a tiny bit lower. One divergence from the UMP is it's also a lot more accurate than the UMP at 4.4 MOA, but this could be brought down even further to 1.72 if you switch out for a longer barrel. But you still shouldn't try to snipe because of the quick velocity drop off that a lot of the pistol rounds have. Also, the muzzle velocity is pretty low at 400, so that's even more of a reason not to try to snipe. Like with the UMP, the low fire rate of the UZI means it's only viable using high penetration rounds like PvP. If you try to leg meta, you're usually in for a rough time, and for the most part, you're relying on your opponent to make a mistake to secure some kills. The STM-9 is our first semi-auto SMG that we are covering. I wasn't able to get the full 10 minutes of footage because my computer shorted itself out, but for the most part, the STM-9 is a pretty bad weapon. Pistol rounds are already considered pretty weak, so the only thing keeping them competitive is the low recoil and fast fire rate. You get to keep the low recoil, but the fast fire rate is arguably more important. Even if you're using PvP bullets, the low volume of fire usually means that the opponent could very easily bounce a headshot, and in that time you take to shoot them again, you might not be able to put a follow-up headshot, so your opponent can easily kill you. That basically sums up most of the encounters. If you don't put them away in the first shot, it's usually game over. This problem is exacerbated with fighting multiple opponents. You can make it pretty accurate, but your best bet is to lean heavily into ergonomics, so at least you can out-aim your opponent. Leg meta is definitely off the table. Aside from that, all I could say is good luck. Theoretically, it is just a bigger pistol. I can also lump the SAIGA 9 with the STM-9, as they're both semi-auto 9x19 SMGs. The only real difference is that the SAIGA 9 uses AK parts, and the STM uses M4 parts. East and west, basically. I would go for the STM because you could get its ergo to a much higher level than the SAIGA. The PP19 Vityaz is a unique SMG. It has a fire rate that's pretty average. At 700 RPM, it's pretty comparable to the AUG at 715 RPM and the AK-12 at 700 RPM. But the low fire rate is actually a blessing in disguise because the recoil is indirectly benefiting from it. And with a starting stat of 194 horizontal recoil, you can mod it down to a much lower and controllable level. I would still recommend leaning heavily into ergonomics, but you'll still be able to get some recoil reduction even if you do lean heavily into ergonomics. Accuracy is also not that big of an issue because it has an MOA of 4.47. You won't be making any long distance snipes with it, but it's good enough in close to medium distance fights. Although 700 RPM makes it viable when using high penetration, the same can't be said for leg meta. 700 RPM is still way too slow to successfully eliminate someone using rip rounds, and it's going to be a repeat of what the UMP and the leg meta was. For our final weapon, and probably one that's been kicking around the longest, we have the PPSH. It has the worst starting ergonomics of any SMG at 39, making aiming a slow and sometimes even annoying chore. This gets even worse if you decide to put on a drum mag, making your PPSH heavier and decreasing your ergonomics by 6. The recoil is not bad at 220 horizontal recoil, but the problem is that you cannot modify the PPSH at all. No sights, no stocks, grips, tactical devices, nothing. The tactical device is, in my opinion, the biggest problem, because that means you need to aim every time in order to land the shots properly. The 7.22 MOA makes this task even harder to do. If not for the 1000 RPM, the PPSH would be borderline unusable. So at the very least, you could aim for the head and hope for a lucky headshot. In terms of what bullets to use, it can go either way really. PST has the best chance of penetrating with 25 penetration and 50 flesh damage, so a lucky headshot could instantly kill someone even if the penetration reduction happens. On the other hand, LRNPC has the best damage at 66 flesh damage, which is about 9 bullets to leg meta somebody. This is very difficult to achieve, so aiming for the face with both choices is really the only option you have. Ironically, I did pretty well with LRNPC while aiming for both the face and the legs. but on average, I'd say the PST is still going to be your best bet. If you have to face an Enforcer class using a Vulcan and level 6 armor, you would probably want LRNPC. Either way, you're never getting through their body armor. So you'd have to try to leg meta them. So it really depends on what you think you'll be fighting the most and adjusting your ammo choice from there. Overall, the PPSH is a pretty terrible gun to use. This video is probably one of my longest because of all the SMGs in Tarkov, and it's probably only going to get even longer. But anyways, I'm always interested in your feedback. Is there anything you enjoyed or hated? If so, make sure to let me know in the comments. At the very least, I hope you learned something and enjoyed the video. Take care, and thanks for watching.